the disappearance of 5 South Korean children, which incited a series of sinister theories such as kidnapping for exploitation, abduction by North Korean spies, abduction by aliens, and even the chilling hypothesis of having been deprived of their freedom to remove their liver, as supposedly this organ cured leprosy. But after 30 years, this tragic case, better known as the Frog Boys, still holds great mysteries that only in the mind of the criminal do the macabre details of these murders reside. The streets of Daegu, South Korea, were lit up by the first rays of the sun. A day of rest was beginning for the inhabitants due to the first regional elections. It was March 26th of the year 91. The offices had closed their doors and the schools remained empty. It seemed like a day to enjoy peace and rest, but the children took advantage of this free time to play outdoors. The fun was found in the streets, especially because at that time technology had not yet arrived to steal much of their childhood. It was very common to find little ones running and shouting, having joyful moments. At around 8 in the morning, 6 friends gathered to hang out. Those who met were Woo Yat-won, Yo Ho-jeon, Kim Jong-gyu, Park Chan-in, Kim Jong-sik, and Kim Tae-ryong. All are aged 9 to 13 years old. They were near Yo Ho-jeon's house, sharing laughs and chats among them, making a great fuss that annoyed one of the tenants nearby. Annoyed, he came out of his house to ask them to leave or keep quiet. And it was for this reason that the boys decided to move their games elsewhere. As they walked planning their next adventure, one of them dropped out of the group. Kim Tae-ryong let them know that he would return home for breakfast, and that he also did not have his mother's permission to go too far. They soon said goodbye to him and came up with the fun, in quotes, idea of going to hunt for salamander eggs. Back then, it was very common to see groups of children playing in parks and mountains, so they already knew the way to and from the mountain known as Hwayong. On their way to their next adventure, they ran into Ho-jong's brother, who was coming at full speed on his bicycle. When he saw them, he stopped to ask where they were heading. They exchanged a few words, and each went their own way. The idea that they were actually heading straight to death never crossed the minds of the little ones. As being innocent, they only cared about having fun, especially in this city that is characterized by its beautiful landscapes surrounded by mountains. The Hwayong mountain located at the western end of the city is known for being somewhat small. However, it's easy to get lost by taking a wrong turn. Even so, the boys were determined to venture into the small forest crowded with pines and undergrowth. They just wanted to hunt salamanders, but what they found cruelly snatched their lives away. Hours passed and the silence in the children's homes became noticeable. It had been a long time since they had shown up for a spin or could be seen around the houses. By 6 in the afternoon, the parents were already at their highest level of concern. Desperate and assaulted by a bad feeling, they decided to go out and look for their little children. Everywhere the name of the 5 missing children was heard. They shouted and searched every corner but without answers. Just before 8 at night, the situation had already gotten out of control. Without any trace, they proceeded to report to the authorities. The suspicion that they were lost in the mountain became the first line of investigation. The incident quickly became so media-focused that it reached the ears of President Roh Tai-woo. The name is very complicated, but it will be appearing here. Without wasting time and hoping to find them alive, he recruited thousands of police and military personnel to expedite the search. Every inch of the mountain was inspected. They looked for clues, even under the rocks. However, it was 3 in the morning, without a single result. The next day, the news took over the front page of all the newspapers. It was an unprecedented event never seen before in South Korea. 5 children disappeared at the same time. The shock of the inhabitants quickly drove them to the brink of madness, unleashing rumors throughout the city that ranged from the sinister to the extravagant. One of the greatest fears was even thinking that North Korean spies had crossed paths with the children, among other kidnapping hypotheses to exploit them and force them to beg for money on the streets, as well as, and perhaps the most outlandish of all, an alien abduction. On the other hand, there were those who resorted to a chilling myth well known in the area. This referred to the belief that the cure for leprosy was found in the livers of children, so they attributed a kidnapping to someone carrying this disease. The truth is that none of these theories would lead him to know his whereabouts. The case was far from being closed, but the attempts to find him did not diminish, let alone skimp on expenses. Millions of flyers covered the city. Milk cartons with the faces of the missing were placed in every home. Billboards, cards, and even candy wrappers carried printed images of the boys. It wasn't long before a reward was offered to anyone who could contribute information to find the lost children. Unfortunately, the desperate attempts of the parents and authorities were of no use, who ended up trapped in a dead end with the same silence as a response. The Frog Children was the name they began to call this tragedy, to make it even more striking, and thus not lose the interest of the public opinion to find them. This event kept all of Korea on alert for an entire year, and in '92 a movie called The Frog Children premiered. After the first anniversary of the disappearance, the hope that they were safe, perhaps experiencing some adventure far from home, where their relatives suffered their absence every minute, was still alive. The film was made with the purpose of encouraging them to return, in case they could see it somewhere, but that was of no use. Once again, they were stranded without clues, which gradually made hope fade away. Time passed, adding its hours to months that turned into years, burying along the way the belief that they might still be alive. The parents of the lost children were only tormented with the memory of their little faces, watching television, playing in the bedroom or on the street with their friends, submerged in a wound that, without even having a body to mourn, would never heal. And so, accustomed to living with pain, came the stormy day of September 26, 2002, 11 years after the disappearance. A man spent the afternoon walking all over the slope of Hwayong Mountain. As he went along, he was collecting bottles when, suddenly, something caught his attention. It was a shallow hole that housed something strange. His curiosity led him to put his hand in to identify the objects, and he got the most unpleasant surprise of his life. They were human bones. Due to their small size, he quickly identified that they belonged to someone small, but the most chilling part was that it was not just one little person. The man was facing the discovery of the bones of several small children, scattered throughout the hole, and alongside them some pieces of children's clothing. Finally, that discovery was the answer that had arrived after a decade to put an end to the questions about the whereabouts of the Frog Children. It was one of the most perverse crime scenes in the history of Korea. Later, investigators and detectives arrived. A group of uniformed officers swarmed the place, trying to collect evidence for the process of identifying the remains. Soon, there was no doubt that it was the Frog Children. Society, and especially the relatives, absolutely shocked, demanded answers and reasons for the death of the infants. However, the police's actions left much to be desired. In the first instance, the absurd confinement they gave to the case, since they attributed the cause of death to severe hypothermia. This only ignited the fury of both the parents and the people who closely followed the investigation over the years. It was not possible that this theory was true, so an autopsy was performed on each of the bodies separately. The wait for the results kept the entire community on edge. And in the meantime, a series of complaints about the poor job the police had done at the crime scene were made public. The bones had been unearthed with picks and shovels through careless procedures, coupled with the lack of tools on the part of the forensic team that carried out the work, as everything pointed to them wanting to get out of the situation as quickly as possible, without the need to continue investigating this case they had been dragging on for years. No one believed they could have gotten lost, as it was well known that the children knew the way home perfectly well, especially from where the bodies were found. It was a complete mockery to suggest that a few meters from the avenue, where even the noise of the cars could be heard, they could have lost their sense of location and lay there until they died of hypothermia. I mean the children. But the truth was about to be revealed. As the days went by, the results of the independent autopsies were approaching, and those diagnoses could hardly be denied. The conclusion inevitably came with that second investigation. Indeed, the little ones had been victims of a savage act. Someone murdered them without remorse. It was detected how several of them suffered head injuries from some blunt object or firearm. In addition, it was also identified that after being massacred, the criminal buried them. This was deduced from the mold remains that remained on the skulls. Without a doubt, over time, the rain and air were slowly digging until they were exposed, in that place where they had certainly been meticulously searched in theory. The unknowns were still in the air, and the question was, how is it that they were not found earlier? after the exhaustive search that extended over so many years. 2 bullet holes in the skull of one of them brought to mind the memory of when at that time the shooting range facilities of the 50th Infantry Division of the ROC Army, which is ROC, were located on the site. Perhaps some stray bullets went through the heads of the miners, taking their lives, and the military, seeing the seriousness of the matter, proceeded to hide the bodies. That was another theory that was formed throughout the case. However, the bullets turned out to be from a shotgun, which the army did not have at that time. On the other hand, any weapon is hard to come by in Korea, so the person who fired it most likely had a license to carry it. The rest of the children showed marks from an unknown tool. Their heads had been brutally crushed by it. Experts trying to reconstruct the events concluded that this object was linked to the killer's profession, thus identifying the suspect as a mechanic. The only thing that the forensic psychologist could determine about the criminal's profile was that it was possibly a mechanic or a single person with no previous criminal record. Despite the fact that the bodies were found and the victims' parents finally had some sort of consolation knowing where their children were, unfortunately, justice was never served. The hope for it was buried thanks to South Korea's statute of limitations, which states that legally, crimes older than 15 years should no longer be investigated. Soon the year 2006 arrived, and with the last grain of faith, everything vanished. Until the year 2015, when the limitation period was extended to 25 years. However, today, more than 30 years after that tragedy, the killer was never arrested and probably will remain so. Not even the blunt weapon with which they were attacked was identified, let alone the reason for the crime. And even though the skulls were donated to the Forensic Research Laboratory to find the truth, for now, nothing would matter due to the interference of the statute of limitations. The final farewell to these little ones took place in the year 2004. They were bid farewell with an emotional ceremony and a dignified funeral. Hundreds of citizens came to offer their condolences and respect for the children who kept the city on edge for so many years due to their tragic disappearance. For its part, the boys' school Songso Elementary, whose name is also appearing here, has maintained its tradition of honoring the life of the 5